All right, so now let's get into kind of the meat of the resume and what we're looking for. It is extremely important for you guys to have a grammatically correct document, okay? You do not want to tell an employer in your document, in your resume, hey, I pay great attention to detail, and then you've got 5 grammatical errors that they can catch just by glancing at it. What that tells them is this person is actually not attentive to any kind of detail. And that's going to be a big strike against you when they're looking at your resume. So we want to make sure that your resume is grammatically and mechanically correct. But like I said, going to the Resume Cafe, submitting your resume to the Accounting Writing Lab email address or to myself, that's going to help you make sure that you achieve that very, very important goal of grammatical correctness in your resume. So here are the sections that are going to be required, and then a couple that are going to be optional when you are creating your resume. So the required sections are going to be your heading with your contact information. So that's like your name, your street address, your phone number, and your email address. Any education that you have, right? So you want to let them know that you currently are enrolled in a bachelor's program, an undergraduate program here at Missouri State for accountancy, and you plan to graduate in 2024 or whenever your graduation date is. We'll get to that when we talk about what actually goes in each of these sections. We'll go into a little more detail. Then you're going to want to list any relevant experience, so any relevant work experience that you have. Now, I say relevant experience. I understand that some of you may not have much relevant experience at all. Some of you may have only had a job where you were a camp counselor, or you were waiting tables at Red Lobster. It doesn't matter. Just if you don't have relevant experience, put some experience on there. It's fine. They just want to see that you are willing and able to show up to a job consistently. Okay. One thing that I have found that they have issue with students in the past is that your workday starts at 8 a.m., but you haven't had a professional job where you've had to be at a place every day at 8 a.m. before, and so you wind up being late more frequently than they would like. So they just want to see that, hey, this person can show up on time, they're dedicated, they're not job hopping every 2 months, anything like that. But we will get into that. So we also have some optional sections that you can add if you're looking to fill some white space, and these are perfectly acceptable sections to add to your resume. However, we'll go into detail about what you should and shouldn't include in those when we get to those specific sections. So things like skills, activities, awards, achievements, any certifications that you might have, those types of things you're going to want to include on your resume if you're looking to fill some space. So here's a header. This is just an example of your heading, right? So here's what you want to include in your heading. This would be an example of what I might put on my personal resume. So you can see it's got my name on there. It's got my address, and it's got a phone number where they can reach me, and then it's got a professional email address, okay? Do not put anything for an email address that is not professional. Typically, you just want to go with like first name, last name at email server, or first name dot last name, or first name, middle initial, last name, something just professional and simple. You don't want, gamer guy 420 as your email address on a professional resume. It just doesn't look good. As much as you might think references like that are funny, an employer probably is not going to find that nearly as funny as you do. So if you do not have a professional email address, go ahead and create one. For right now, if you need to, it is okay to use your school email address, although I would recommend going and creating an address on somewhere like Gmail or Yahoo or something like that that you can use, because eventually you're going to lose access to your school email address once you graduate. So things you don't want to include in the heading, just because these are things that, even though you don't want to be discriminated on, it's still possible. Plus, firms don't want to see these things because it's a liability for them. Because you could tell them, if somebody didn't get a job, you could say, oh, well, I had my age listed on there, and that's not in their hiring model to hire somebody over 25 years old, and that's why I didn't get hired. So do not stick your age, your sex, your race, your religion, any marital status, your national origin. Nothing like that needs to go in your header, just very basic information so that they can easily contact you if you need to. One other thing, do not put a hyperlinked email address inside of your header. Why? Yeah, because you're handing this to them as a physical copy. Can you click on a link in a physical piece of paper? You cannot. So don't include hyperlinked email addresses. Your objective statement. Here I will tell you, the general rule is do not use one. Okay, we will talk about cover letters later on in the semester. There are often jobs, and it seems to be coming back into fashion that when you apply for a job, they want an application, a resume, and a cover letter now. The cover letter is the place to put your objective statement, not inside your resume. Because what is your objective when you're handing somebody a resume? It's to get a job. Guess what they know you're already trying to do? Get a job, right? So there are exceptions for this rule. If you have plans for graduate school, to sit for the CPA exam, to sit for a CMA or a CFE, or sit for some kind of certification, you can let them know that. If you haven't been accepted into grad school yet, you can say, hey, I plan to pursue a Master's of Business Administration and a CPA certification. Or I plan to pursue a Master's of Accountancy and a CPA certification, or a Master's of Accountancy and a CFE certification. So you can use the objective statement. Again, this is one of those times where if you have a resume that you feel is full and robust, I would not use one. However, if you are looking to fill a little bit of white space, I would say go ahead and put one in there, but only for a very specific reason, right? Don't just say, I want to work for X CPA firm. Say, hey, I do plan on pursuing a Master's of Business Administration. I'm just not eligible to apply yet. So your education, you want to include your education. This is something obviously they are very interested in. So you're going to want to include if you've got an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, just include all of that information and your graduation dates. If you are currently enrolled, like you guys are currently enrolled in an undergraduate program, put your projected graduation date. Okay, they're interested in knowing that. Like I said, it's for them knowing when is this person going to be eligible to sit for the CPA exams and when are they going to be eligible to use that certification. Do not include anything in your education that are degrees you plan on pursuing but are not currently accepted to. Like we talked about, that's something that you would do in an objective statement or in a cover letter. You don't want to include your high school education. To be quite frank with you, they don't care about your high school education. They are looking for people who are educated in a college or a university. So don't include any high school information. And if your GPA is below a 3.0, I would not include it. Just don't include it. There are firms, and the harsh reality of this is there are firms that will look at your GPA, and if it does not meet a certain threshold, they just file you away under do not contact. That's just the harsh reality because they, honestly, the recruiting process is just very competitive in accounting. So if your GPA is below a 3.0, do not include it. Your relevant experience, what you're going to want to include are things like this. For me, I have a resume that could run much longer than a single page. However, I keep it to relevant experience. I have additional experience that I don't feel is necessarily relevant to any of the positions that I've applied for in the past. So I keep that off of there. I do make a note, as you can see right here, that I do make a note that, hey, if you do want to know more about my work history that's not listed on here, I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. So additional experience available on request is a good way to summarize that for them. So here you can see just a little bit of what would go on my resume. Some things you don't want to include. You don't want to include weak skill descriptions, right? Greeted customers at the door, answered phones, listened carefully, right? So like something like listened carefully, that's not really a skill. That's just kind of something they expect you to do, right? That's like saying I can be on time. Okay. Yeah, hopefully you can. You're going to be working in a professional environment where other people are relying on your attendance, right? So just avoid weak skill descriptions. I have included a document in this folder that are good action verbs, and it comes from the Career Center. So it's just a list of good action verbs that you can use inside of your resume that just kind of spice it up a little bit. In your skills, if you do include a skills section, one thing I have in the past kind of steered students away from was saying that they're proficient in Microsoft Office. And that's because in my professional experience, being proficient in something like Excel, especially in the accounting profession, is just kind of an expectation. They expect you based on the curriculum that you're going through in your undergraduate program, and if you go through a graduate program, you're going to be taking some more information systems courses. They just expect you to be able to handle yourself in Excel and Word and all that. But I have talked to some employers, especially last semester, so I did update this to say, you know what, it's okay. If you do want to throw that in there, go ahead and include it in some of your skills. You know, if you've got academic experience with software like IDEA software you'll use in your AIS classes, or maybe you might touch on it a little bit in your audit class, let them know that, hey, I'm familiar with QuickBooks, I'm familiar with whatever software. Now, typically CPA firms, unless you're working in a consulting position, aren't going to deal with QuickBooks all that often, but they may. And honestly, these resumes are tailoring them to the job that you want to apply for, right? So that comes with doing the research on the employer and knowing what they're looking for. If you are fluent in a second or third or fourth language, let them know that is very, very valuable. However, do not tell them that you are fluent in a language if you are not fluent in a language. That means being both verbal and being able to write and read that language, okay? For example, my wife is Korean. Her and her mother speak exclusively Korean to each other. I've been with my wife for 15 years now, so I understand it. I can understand what they're saying most of the time. I can read it for the most part. I would never, ever, ever tell anybody that I am fluent in Korean. Ever. I would never put that on my resume. Simply because the day would come where they would say, hey, we need somebody that speaks Korean. Oh, Kyle can do it. And then I would have to go, oh, you know what? I'm not actually fluent. So only put something like that if you are legitimately fluent in that language. Do not include skills that are weak. So good listener, hardworking, can be on time, things like that, right? Those are all just expectations. They expect you to be able to listen when somebody is talking to you. They expect you to work hard. They are paying you a decent salary after all. They expect you to be a reliable person. That's why they're looking at your resume. They're looking at your job history, right? These are all just expectations. These are not skills, okay? These are just expectations. Also, it can be a little bit dangerous to put really, really, really specific skills on your resume. It's just like the fluency in another language, the multilingual thing. It can just be dangerous. If you put a very specific skill and you think you're very good at something, and it comes down to it and it turns out maybe you're not as good as you thought you were, you don't want that on your resume. For example, you know, I would consider myself a more advanced Excel user than most people. However, I would not consider myself an expert. I would not put myself at expert level. I would say I'm probably high intermediate level. So if that gives you any idea of kind of what you should be saying your skill level is in something. So organizations, you definitely just want to include anything that has been beneficial to you. So if you're a member of Beta Alpha Psi, if you're a member of Accounting Club, or one of the other student organizations here on campus, include that. Those are something that you're active in and you've got to put effort in. They like to see things like that, especially things like Beta Alpha Psi, where they know that the students have met a certain threshold for GPA, they've met a certain threshold for volunteer and service hours. They like to see that kind of thing. However, you do not want to include anything that was a high school organization unless it is something you've continued into college. Like if you were a member of FBLA in high school and you continued it into college, that is fine. Add that. But if you stopped FBLA after you graduated high school, don't include it. Okay, those are things that you can talk about in your interview possibly, but you're not going to want to put it on your resume. So any awards, any achievements that you've gotten, those are definitely things you want to brag about, right? But you want to make sure that they are relevant and appropriate. So like the two listed here would be very good examples of relevant and appropriate awards to kind of brag about on your resume, right? They like to see things like that. Those awards typically mean that you are very dedicated teachable person. And that's what they're looking for in an employee. You don't want to include things that are irrelevant or inappropriate, like I won a hot dog eating contest. They don't care about that, right? Also, and I know you guys are not far separated from high school, most of you, but do not include your high school awards. Just to be blunt and honest with you, they do not care about your high school career for the most part, at least not on a resume. They may ask you about it during your interview, but that's fine. In the interview process, they can show a little bit more interest in the detail of things, right? These resumes really are about them being able to pick up your resume, look at it, and have an idea of how they want to direct the conversation.